Welcome to the Jack Mountain Bushcraft Podcast, episode 39.
Welcome to the Jack Mountain Bushcraft Podcast with your host, Jack Mountain Bushcraft School founder and Master Main Guide, Tim Smith.
I'm your host, Tim Smith. I'm a registered Master Main Guide, and in 1999 I founded the Jack Mountain Bushcraft School. We help people become more skilled, more knowledgeable, more experienced, and more confident outdoors by using traditional skills, a few simple tools, and field-based experience. Whether you're looking to go from city slicker to competent outdoor professional, want to experience a remote expedition, or just want to learn a few new outdoor skills, we've got you covered. You can check out the show notes to this and all of our podcasts at blog.jackmtn.com. When you're there, click on the podcast button. And if you enjoy the show, please leave us a review on iTunes. Lastly, the best way to keep up with our programs and trips is to join our email newsletter, and you can do that at jmbnews.com. Hello and welcome back to the Jack Mountain Bushcraft Podcast. Seated in the guide shack with my good friends Ed, aka Working Class Woodsman, Christopher Russell, and Tom, who is a student on the current Wilderness Bushcraft semester. How are we doing today, gentlemen?
I'm doing good. Yeah.
Yep, no complaints.
No complaints at all. I have lots of complaints, and I've alphabetized them, but the list is too long, and I'll read them after we're done.
That's episode 40.
And it's only a 30-minute podcast.
Yeah.
There's not enough. We don't have the bandwidth.
No.
It's the bandwidth. So today we want to talk about some current events, talk about a little bit about gear. We're going to delve into minimum impact camping and just interaction with the land. And lastly, get all philosophical and talk about different ways of seeing the landscape and different knowledge systems, I guess, if you will. But to start with, Ed, you was it last weekend?
Two weekends ago.
2 weekends ago,
Yep.
You went to the New England Bushcraft Show down in Massachusetts, right?
Down in Carleton, Mass.
And how was that?
It was a really good time. I had a great time, actually. I met some really good people, made some good contacts, and looking forward to going again next year, actually. And it's going to be bigger, and they're going to have more vendors and more options for the people that come and spend the day, and it was a really good turnout. The parking lot was packed, and everyone seemed to be in pretty good spirits. The weather was perfect.
Nice. Yeah. We couldn't make it because we were busy up here running the semester, but I spoke to Marcus, the organizer, the head guy at New England Bushcraft, right after the show, and we're hoping we can make it next year. He seems like a great guy, and you said he ran a Class A show and a really good operation.
Oh yeah, no, everything was, and it was, as far to my understanding, as far as I know, it was the first show, the first event,
right?
That
yeah.
they've done, and I thought it went off really well. It seemed to be everything was done professionally, and everyone there was a good flow throughout the whole day. There wasn't any It was super cool in the morning, and everybody kind of just got bored in the afternoon. There were all kinds of things going on all day, different events, primitive skills being demonstrated, wilderness walks, stuff like that. It was a great time. I enjoyed it.
So pretty neat in the era, especially in the era of social media. We were talking yesterday in the canoes. It's neat because, you know all these people, but you never met them in person, right? So it's neat to put a face to the screen name.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to start dropping names because I'm going to forget a lot of people, but the Hidden Woodsman, Any Wilderness, Micah George, Jeff Hatch, Badger Claw Leather, all those guys. I mean, I've had I hate to say internet relationships, but we've had
I'm glad you added the ships.
Yeah, that was a weird turn of
internet
phrase
friendships, no relationships yet. But anyway,
Please don't edit that out, Tim.
I don't even know how.
But no, when you meet, when you have an online friendship or with someone and you meet them and they actually turn out to be pretty cool people, it's cool, because a lot of times it doesn't work that way.
It's never worked that way for me.
And often it doesn't.
People meet me and they're like, I'm out of here.
I'm just glad I didn't meet you on the internet, Tim. But anyway, so no, it was, but you finally get to, you put a name and a face to that personality. And, do you see how these folks are they genuinely just want to experience the natural world and live with the wilderness.
That's great.
It's awesome.
And like we talked about yesterday, we here are huge fans of events like this, specifically this event, because, it really draws attention to a lot of the smaller businesses. Yeah. We've all heard of like the big national companies and stuff, but it's a great leg up for the small kind of mom and pop or single operator business. And it's great. It's great for them to get that exposure, and it's great. I think it's a rapidly growing industry, right? But there's definitely room for I think there's room for everybody, because no two people are trying to do the exact same thing. So like we super support like the small time gear manufacturers. Yep. We love supporting other schools and stuff, just because maybe the villain, that's a bad word.
Yep.
The problem in 2018 is just people don't know about what's going on and what you're doing. So the more events like that, the more people network and talk, the more people learn about what we do. The more people learn about what we do, the more they learn about events like this. So it's all reciprocal. So the better success that we get here, the more success hopefully some of the other small businesses around the region will get, and vice versa.
Yeah, and that's something that Chris and I talk about all the time, whereas everyone in this, and I don't even want to call it an industry, but let's just say an organization.
A community. I think it's a community.
That's a better word.
Yeah.
Thank you. When everyone gets along, it's better for everyone in the community. And I say get along, I mean, we all have the same interests and the same goals, and it just works for everyone when everyone gets along and networks.
To some extent, but I think everybody loves a good old-fashioned Twitter feud. Like, even if we manufactured it, like and I should get on like an argument on Instagram, because it draws a lot of, it's like a car accident. People have to watch, they want to see that.
Yep, and we've done that.
The conflict.
I think you guys are about to start one right now during this podcast.
We're going to argue over who owns certain hashtags.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. But anyway.
And something that you brought away from the show was you ended up with a new piece of gear that you brought up here.
Oh yeah, the turning point for me, I guess, is after meeting Micah George from Any Wilderness. He uses the War Bonnet Blackbird hammock, and camping. I had a few bad experiences with hammocks when I was younger, and I just couldn't sleep in a hammock. And Chris, we've talked about this. You have an issue with hammocks too.
I hate them.
Well, you haven't tried the War Bonnet Blackbird XLC, because I'll tell you what, there's a few things about it. And after seeing Micah set up and checking out his setup, it's like I could give this another try. And I get a hold of the folks at War Bonnet. They hooked me up, and I'm absolutely thrilled with it, in the respect that there's a lot of, you're not sleeping in the banana-shaped hammock. It's designed so you actually sleep level, and it's just a whole different system.
I'm in the market for a hammock that actually looks like a giant banana that I can hang between two trees.
Well, they make that.
Isn't that Ben's hammock?
Yeah, you can use
I'm
Ben.
pretty sure Ben's hammock.
And while we're at it, I want a bathtub shaped like a giant clam.
And that's all you need?
Those two things.
And your lamp. But anyway, not to get off on too much of a tangent, as we do so often.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in other words, what I took from it was, the one thing I really took from it was that there's more than one way to, I guess, skin a cat. I guess, as far as like, if you're going to spend time in the wilderness, you can do, you can, like the other night when we were out on the canoe trip. Chris slept under a canoe.
Yep.
Tom slept in a tent. I slept in a hammock, and you went to the...
Well, I set up a tent, but I hiked out to a bed and breakfast. I don't know if you guys knew this, but season 1 of Bear Grylls Man vs. Wild, I served as the consultant on the Alaska Mountain Range episode, and I learned a few good things there, and one of which was to definitely sneak out and go back to a hotel. Yeah. But there were a lot of rumors flying around about that. Bear leaves and goes back and sleeps in a 5-star hotel. Like, I remember hearing all the rumors, and I was actually contacted by a member of the press from one of the big magazines who were trying to do like an expose, and they're like, trying to get me to admit, like, just admit that he goes back and sleeps at a 5-star hotel. And I'm like, listen, buddy, first of all, there is no way that hotel was 5 stars.
Because you remember I don't know if it was Tom, someone said they thought they heard a bear, and it was actually Tim trying to get back to his tent.
Oh,
That's right.
Well,
Before we woke up, he had to get back to maintain.
it was the guy
the facade.
it was the guy dropping me off the 4-wheeler.
Yeah, because like bears don't wear headlamps.
That's right.
Not yet.
No,
Like, it was a cleverly constructed wall of brush right behind it, which is
Yeah.
a major road through the North Main Woods.
So, how was your experience, Chris?
Yeah, I like sleeping under canoe. It's comfortable, but it's not super comfortable. But I like it. But I think most of it is just a romance thing for me. I like the idea of the old voyageurs just rolling their canoes on the side of the.
It's classic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also, right now, it's very seasonally
Yeah.
appropriate, right? Like, we had a cold night, it was in the 20s, and cold nights mean no bugs, and sleeping under the canoe without a bug net in, like, I don't know,
No,
around mid-June,
never.
no way, no how.
So
no
I'm
bug.
getting my fix, if you will, before they come out.
Good idea.
Just enjoying it while I can.
This is sort of the Goldilocks
Yeah.
period of time here, after the snow, before the bugs.
It's also partly that I'm just kind of lazy, and it's a lot easier to just roll my canoe over than to like bring along a tent and set it up. So I just do that.
Yeah, well, it's a classic, but it's a classic scene in so many paintings. Guys sleeping under canoes with their Hudson Bay blankets.
Right.
So, how did you fare, Tom?
I did well. I have a little bivvy-like tent. It's more like a bivvy sack with some shoulder and head space room. It comes down real easy. It goes up real easy, and it's perfect for a canoe.
Quick and light. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Or a backpack. Or...
How was your first night in the hammock?
Well, like everything, it's always a learning experience because Chris and I literally opened the box that day. I literally had the 2-day priority shipping box on site. So
Unboxing video coming tomorrow.
well, no, we're going to spare.
No, I got a one-on-one unboxing experience with the Working Class Woodsman. It was pretty magical, but we won't talk about that right now.
And that's something that we're going to keep that to ourselves for the sake. But anyway, it was great. But like everything, it's a learning curve. And what I learned was that I was told when I talked to the folks at Warbonnet, it's like we do make a quilt option that goes underneath to keep your back insulated, or you can put in a sleeping pad. So I'm like, well, it's going to be maybe 40 degrees. I've got a 15-degree bag. I'll be fine. And at 1:30 in the morning, Chris thought the forest was on fire because I was up. I had to get the fire going because I was cold. So I get up and light the fire, and Chris coming over to make sure someone hadn't, started another forest
I thought
fire.
we had burned down the North Main Woods. I genuinely did for a moment.
So what we came to the conclusion that no, Ed, you need
a sleeping
You
pad.
need a sleeping pad in that hammock, you idiot. So this is what he said, actually. So
Verbatim.
So Chris had an extra sleeping pad. I put in the sleeping pad in the hammock because it's a double layer bottom and you slide the pad right in, and I was fine. So anyway, my next guess what I'm getting to is the next purchase is I'm getting the quilt that goes underneath the hammock, and I'll be one happy camper.
So I guess bigger picture, right, is there are a variety of sleeping shelters available on the market.
Yep.
And, there are a variety of ones that are appropriate for a given situation. For example, if we were out winter camping and it was 30 below and you were in your hammock with no pad,
You'd be dead.
it's not an appropriate shelter there. Agreed?
That is 100% agreed.
100% agreed.
Yep.
Similarly, like a tiny backpacking tent, if you're camped out for any length of time, anything more than, say, 3 days, probably not appropriate for really cold weather. But and similarly, like how you were sleeping, appropriate right now, not appropriate in the winter, wouldn't be appropriate in the summer with lots of bugs, right? So
Absolutely.
The point is that, there's lots of different appropriate options, and a lot of it just comes down to personal choice. Another thing that we talked about on the trip is people are cooking and processing water for themselves on the trip, and different people have different cook pots, different options. You know, and on the one end, you know, I've met people who want to do everything with like a 16-ounce titanium mug from purify their or sanitize their water, and there's a difference between sanitize and purify to cook their food and whatever. And you know, that works great if you're not trying to take care of other people, if you're not trying to take care of a group, if you're not against stopping and sanitizing more water. But I made the point on the trip that I always bring a big milk pail so that I could sanitize all the water that I would need in one boil, you know, for a 24 or 48 hour period. So again, like, certain things are appropriate in one place and maybe not as appropriate in other situations. So that leads us to like another different type of shelter, like the one that you were living in here at the field school full time, your house, if you will.
Yeah, I'm up here essentially until the end of our fall semester in October. So I built an upscaled version of a hoop house or dome shelter that we build up here anyway. And I can only do that because I'm here permanently. It wouldn't make sense to build one of those every time I went out on trail.
Yeah. So, but and what I'm getting at is that, you know, when we were actually out the other night, we all had options where we brought everything in with us, where we didn't have to harvest anything from the land in order to set stuff up. And traditional camping and bushcraft gets a bad rap because a lot of people will go out and just maim the forest with a hatchet or a chainsaw in order to make some oftentimes half-assed shelter with tarps and poles and ropes and whatever. And you know, it's not necessary, and often it's not appropriate, right? Yes. And you said something, it wasn't related to this, but it was something to the effect of just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, that's right. It was like a Jurassic Park film, you know, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should.
You mean the documentary?
Yes, that's right.
About where they're bringing the dinosaurs back to life.
That's right. DNA.
And we're lucky that they're trapped on that island, otherwise we'd be overrun with them.
I'm thankful.
But yeah, there's something to be said about what you're talking about, and especially, you know, we're really lucky up here on the field school property that we can do big long-term shelters, and our students get to build shelters from the land and stuff. But the gear that we're talking about allows other people to feed that urge to get out, and they wouldn't be able to do that otherwise. So like, I think that's an important point. Yeah. An important point to make. That was hard.
Too much coffee for you?
Yeah, not enough.
Well, no, it's a big, and again, back to the hammock option is that you don't need a campsite. All you need are 2 trees. Or you could use a tree and a telephone pole if you had to. I mean, you just need two objects to hang it from.
You hire 2 people to hold you up.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
You know, if you're urban camping and you know you're out on the street and you're between a meter and a light pole, you could in theory hang your hammock.
Could you tie one end to a rock and the other to a hard place?
If it was a big enough rock. And you find the hard anyway.
We're going to check the explicit box if there's any bad language.
But anyway,
but I think we're talking about different ways that people sort of massage that urge that they have to just to get out and experience time, you know, away from town, away from the house.
Well, and again, like down the folks that I ran into, they're condensed into a very small area, and there's only so many places they can go, and it has to be low impact. Yeah. So it's better you have an option to at least be out there. And then it comes down to, you know, what kind of equipment you choose to use. That's personal preference.
Right. And but I think I see it now in, you know, there's different camps, but you know, some people will say, "Oh, that's not bushcraft enough. That's not this enough. That's not that enough." Yeah. So the idea about, like, you know, I just want to say that from our perspective, it's okay if you want a hammock camp or tent camp or go out and spend the day somewhere and then go back to a hotel, right? It's all massaging that urge to get out, and there are lots of ways to do that, and lots of ways that maybe are appropriate in one place, like, for example, making a shelter here using a lot of materials from the landscape that aren't appropriate in other places.
Yeah. If I went to Central Park and built a hoop house, that would not be an appropriate use of those resources. But up here...
Central Park in Ashland or Presque Isle?
No one knows where that is except for us, Tim. You can't make those jokes. Central Park, New York.
What? New York? I've heard of Old York. There's a new one?
You actually could build a hoop house in Central Park and Presque Isle, probably.
Oh, God. Yeah, so... But expanding on that theme further, there's this whole idea that we have this big movement now called Leave No Trace, or sometimes known as the minimum impact camping. And I've always had a problem with that, right? Because when we talk about minimum impact, what we're talking about is we're not including a bigger worldview. And by that, I will make the claim here now that minimum impact, as it's marketed to the masses, is actually displaced impact, in that there is a massive impact from creating that gear that allows people like us the other night to go to a spot, set up stuff that we brought with us, pack it up in the morning, and then leave. So there's not a big impact there where we were recreating, right? But all that stuff comes from somewhere. So the idea that it's minimum impact doesn't take into account the oil that we pump out of the ground in the Middle East to make the nylon, the minerals we use to make like camping stoves and things like that. Not that we used one, but just that idea that the impact isn't felt where the recreating is taking place. So here we like to take a bigger picture thing and think about displaced versus minimum impact. So I would make the claim that your big hoop house shelter, Christopher, is probably more minimum impact when we take in a whole world view. Because given a little bit more time, all those little saplings that you harvested to make that, they're going to grow back.
Yeah, and the logs and stuff that are building the base and the boughs that make the floor and everything, that's all going to rot, decompose, and go back into the system, essentially, which is, I think, to me, that is definitely more leave no trace than if I cleared out an area and flattened it and put a tent on it.
So it's leave no trace because we're including time into the equation, right?
Exactly. It's long-term leave no trace as opposed to...
But I'm not making the claim that making hoop houses and things would be appropriate in every environment.
No.
So there has to be there has to be judgment and balance. And that's why I would make a horrible legislator because then you have to try to come up with laws and word them in such a way that they apply to everybody everywhere all the time, and you're serving numerous masters there, right? And
right.
That's a hard thing to pull off.
Well, I would say that there's, we were talking about being appropriate with your use of materials, right? And I would make the argument, and I wouldn't even say it's an argument. It's just kind of an observation that people are making appropriate use of material by taking a tent into some place where that's not sustainable. Right?
I agree. Wholeheartedly.
And that's an important point to make here. It's really easy with a lot of this stuff for people to get kind of purist about it. And I think that that's the danger. And kind of what you were talking about with the legislation is that when you allow people to just assume that people are going to make good choices about what they're using and have an understanding of the land.
That's a recipe for disaster. Assuming people are going to make good decisions?
Not people as a whole, but people as individuals. Tim, if we keep using us as a focus group for people making good decisions, we're never going to have any optimism ever. Right. We have to get away from that.
So, but I agree wholeheartedly. For example, let's say the four of us decided to go on a backpacking trip into a high alpine sensitive ecological zone, right? And I'm like, let's cut down that 3-foot spruce and burn it. Because in reality, it's 500 years old. Yeah. And every step we take, we'll just, we'll burn all this stuff and we'll build out of that, and not appropriate remotely there. It is appropriate here because we're in an area of northern Maine that we're the only people that come through here ever. And
for now.
Well, yeah.
Once we open up that casino, things are going to change.
Yeah. Well, when Atlantis comes back out from under the ocean, all those people are going to have to come somewhere to recreate, and I think it's going to be in the Northern Maine woods.
But they don't gamble.
So would you say that balance is a requirement? You were looking at how many people are involved with the land. So the fewer the people involved with the land, the more that you can do with it. So you get a state park where people are going there every day to picnic or whatever. You can't do a lot of the things that we do. But if you go into the backcountry, say Pecos Wilderness in New Mexico or whatever, where nobody goes, there's more that you can do with the land.
That's exactly what I'm saying. High use areas, it's inappropriate. Really low use remote areas, I'd say it's more appropriate. And we're not talking about the law. Somebody might comment and say, is it legal?
Right.
Here we're on private property, it's legal. But if it's government property, figure out what the laws are, follow the laws, don't break the law, don't go to jail.
And always check local laws and regulations wherever you are. because they change in different parts of the country
Yeah.
and parts of the world, obviously.
That is very
But
true.
what we can get away with in the Northeast, you probably can't get away with in Yosemite. Let's say
That's right.
So yeah, I think I just always like to point out the difference there between minimum impact versus displaced impact, because and nothing against people, they maybe just don't know any better, but I've been hiking in the White Mountains or something, and I had a pack basket, and when people found out that I cut down a tree to make it, oh my God, that's horrible. But then looking at the stuff that they had.
I think what you're kind of getting at, and what we're kind of zeroing in on here when we keep talking about stuff being appropriate, is that having a knowledge of the land you're working with lets you better be leave no trace than taking a piece of gear that is like a blanket system for leave no trace anywhere. So if I know I'm going camping in a state park like Tom mentioned, and I have a working understanding of ecosystems and the amount of people that are going to be there, I'm not going to go there planning to build a shelter. I'm going to go there with a tent because I understand that if I take something away, there's something less for the other thousands of people that are going to be there. But so yeah, we always kind of push the more you know, the less you carry kind of thing. But I think that's even more important when you're talking about gear and leave no trace and stuff.
Yeah, but you can still go, the whole go light theory, like we talk about quite a bit.
Yeah.
You can still go light and be skilled with minimal gear.
Yeah, of course.
You don't have to.
Absolutely.
You absolutely don't have to take and buy every latest gadget, and you can still get by with minimal gear, even going light.
My whole sleep
with an
system
amount of skill.
fits in my loincloth.
Well, I've seen your loincloth; it's pretty big. But
Anyway.
So there's an interesting point, though, is where does like a good idea for camping gear when does that just become a marketing scheme?
Well, there's the poison. It's like it's the whole leave no trace concept is great.
Because it's a set of ideas, right?
Yeah, it's a set of ideas that allows for somebody who maybe doesn't know a lot about the ecosystem they're in to take a relatively safe approach to living in the outdoors. Tim's writing me love notes as we speak, and I'm having a hard time following this train of thought.
If that's a love note, I don't see a hate mail.
But yeah, so anyway, leave no trace is a set of ideas that allows a relatively unknowledgeable person with just these basic set of principles go out into the woods and not harm it entirely. The danger, in my mind, is when a company or something markets a piece of gear as the only piece of gear you need to be leave no trace when you go out in the outdoors, because that's kind of like co-opting this set of ideals that is a good one, as much as we rag on it, and becoming about selling stupid gear,
moving product.
Exactly.
And it's not only with leave no trace, like every industry. And right now, I would say there's no industry as guilty as maybe the bushcraft industry with regards to just pushing product. For the sake of pushing product.
It's the perversion of the word, or however you want to put it. There's always someone coming up with another product that's better, and it's the more products that are out there, the further we become from the actual art of bushcraft.
Just removed from the land. So did you notice that? Like, because I've been to rendezvous in the past, or gatherings, whatever, where people you got to have the right look, you got to have the right knife, you got to to be in the in crowd. It's more about the stuff than the action.
In all fairness, as far as there's two camps. The guys that were actually selling products down there, like they were very pretty in touch with bushcraft. Okay. I did notice some people that came to the event had things that defy explanation. I mean,
go on.
At some point, if I'd have seen a flak jacket by the end of the day, I wouldn't have been surprised. But again, that was people coming not knowing what to expect.
Exactly.
Maybe drinking a little bit too much of the internet Kool-Aid. Okay.
Or the liquor that was available in the parking lot at the show.
Whatever. But not to say that wasn't. Yeah, but that wasn't. It wasn't a big. But I did notice there were certain people that would say over prepared for a weekend at a park.
Would you say that they prepped for the bushcraft
Yes, they
event?
prepped for the bushcraft weekend, and that right in there lies the problem. It's like it's anyway. And I'm not ragging on anybody, but I will say that the folks that and there were a couple of different camps. Like that had a different approach to bushcraft. But what is bushcraft anyway?
Exactly. That's what I was saying
What is
earlier.
bushcraft?
We can't be purist about it, and
Yeah.
there's such a desire to be.
I think we agree. Go ahead.
No, that's it. There's such a desire to be, but I think that alienates a lot of people that maybe want to get into this stuff and learn about it. And I don't think it's good.
The only explanation, or the best way I can, in my head, I can come to terms with it, is like bushcraft is basically an art taken from people in Australia and parts of Africa that lived in the bush, okay? And they crafted everything they needed from the bush with minimal tools and basically tools that they made.
Sure.
Okay, that's safe. And let's just say bushcraft was a term by the Dutch or whoever 200 years ago, 150 years ago, I don't know. And I'm going to get hung for this, but I'm going to say it anyway. But so along comes, a more advanced set of people with steel axes, with saws, with tools, and they started to adapt to their lifestyle with the advantages of tools. But it's still bushcraft. In other words, they're still, they're still making, they're living in the bush. They're creating stuff that they use every day with tools and equipment. But the more technology gets advanced, the more the tools get advanced. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Are you sure? Because I've always defined bushcraft as the guy that takes the shrub and makes it look like Mickey Mouse at Disney World. That's not it?
That's a perversion of bushcraft. Yes, and there are other kinds of. This is a rabbit hole you don't want to go down, but
I was
anyway.
once.
So what I'm saying is, so to get back to it, it's like just because you don't have wax canvas and leather doesn't mean in the latest greatest $200 axe doesn't mean you're still not participating in bushcraft.
Wax canvas and leather sounds like the best hipster bar ever.
It's pretty cool stuff. I bought a bunch of it. I love it.
So I guess I would like to just make a point that there's
Where are you
nothing
going?
wrong. There's nothing wrong with selling gear. There's nothing wrong with
Absolutely.
having gear. There's nothing wrong with
Absolutely.
wanting gear. But it's when the gear becomes the focus and it's all gear and no interacting with the land. That's sort of what we're taking issue with.
So anyway, I guess
Well, if I can just cut in really quick, Ed, I have a line of loincloths that are for sale. If anybody's interested, you can contact me after the podcast. Go on.
yeah. Anyway, what I did notice was that
I needed a new loincloth.
that the folks that everyone there just had a true. All they really wanted to do was just get out in the woods, build their fires, and spend time in the woods and live in the natural world. And obviously, someone who lives in urban Massachusetts has to approach it. Everyone can do it, and you just have to approach it with a different style. But it's still bushcraft.
yeah.
And we joke around a lot, and it sounds like it's like, well, but we're not like, well, it's like saying, okay, let's just say hunting started out using the addle, right? People used to put food on the table with the addle for what, 30,000 years?
I thought they were wrestling stuff and then like hitting them.
Okay, let's go even further back. But so what I'm
In a
saying is,
loincloth.
so after
from
so
chrissloincloths.com.
then you got they invent the bow, the long bow, then the firearm. So someone who goes out elk hunting in Montana, well, if he's not using an addle, he's not hunting. No, it's still hunting, right? So it's just
Well, it depends on what he's wearing.
Well, exactly.
A loincloth.
Right. But what I'm saying is, it's still bushcraft. You're just using
Yeah.
different equipment. So
Of course. And you're using the equipment, hopefully, like what we were talking about. You're using the equipment that's appropriate for where you are
Correct.
and what you can do and continue to be a good steward of the land you're working on.
correct. Yeah.
But is there a distance that you can take that? For instance, the guy that is shooting an 800-yard rifle, he doesn't really have to do a lot. He gets a pair of binoculars and he sees an elk on the other side.
Is
of the
that
ridge.
hunting?
Yeah, I mean,
It's
I
not,
guess it's
or is it just killing? Right?
yeah. And well, I guess that depends on what he does with. I don't know.
But this is the danger,
a
right?
But,
That
see,
we can.
but you can see
Right.
now we've gone down. But this is what's happened to bushcraft.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
just like,
It can become like a.
and you're right. You can dissect it into, well, it's not really hunting. Okay, what's hunting? What is the definition? So, and what's bushcraft? What is
Yeah.
the definition?
Human beings really like to classify, or Western human beings really like to classify stuff, put it into neat little categories. But as far as I'm concerned, if you want to come hang out in the woods with me and have a fire and have a cup of coffee, that's bushcraft. Like, come hang out, come enjoy it. I don't really care if you have nice canvas stuff. I don't care if
Yeah, and you don't
sleeping
care if
in
you
a
call
shelter.
it bushcraft, classic camping, wilderness experience, or what was it? Skog life? What was the other one? You called it something.
Loincloths.
Anyway.
Yeah. Right.
But
this is getting off on a tangent.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, so any definition, I think, needs to be inclusionary rather than exclusionary.
Yes.
You know, you don't want to like tell somebody what they're doing is not what the desired term is, right? Like I wouldn't want to say, oh, what you're doing isn't bushcraft. Like, and I know there was a thing a bit ago, another friend of ours was railing about how some people were saying if you light a fire with a match, or that's not bushcraft, it's got to be a ferro rod, and kind of little parameters like that. And it's not that people can't have their own ideas and their own opinions, and I think it's great for people to have that. But
the Aborigines had some pretty big ferro rods.
Yeah. Have you seen them?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Anyway.
I'm sorry. Did I break the concentration?
No, never.
But anyway, there is still a lot of people. The problem. Back to what we were talking about leave no trace. A lot of the problem with the leave no trace equipment that people are using is made in all different parts of the world that don't adhere to the same environmental standards that we do. So just because you're not leaving a trace right in front of us doesn't mean we're not making an impact on the rest of the world. So,
right. That's it's displaced impact.
That's
not minimal.
Yeah, exactly. So if you wanted to kind of put that, you can put it into better words than I can, but. Just because it's not going on in front of you doesn't mean it doesn't have an effect on the natural world.
Right on.
Right. Yeah. So when you can buy products that are now made in the country, which have a lower carbon footprint than the ones that were available like 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah. So support local.
Support local. That's what we're trying to say.
Buy American. Buy local. Buy from somebody that you can meet. Like, not just your food, your gear too. If you can get it locally, that's awesome. So one gripe that I have heard people say is that, if everybody went out and tried to do bushcraft, there'd be no trees left. And that's a valid concern. Yeah. So, and I think that, maybe everybody can't do it. Maybe everybody, there's too much of us and not enough space. And if everybody decided they wanted to do that, if everybody wanted to become, say, an expert with an axe and clear an acre, it would be like 1800 in New England. We'd have no trees left because it would be all like sheep farms. Maybe, it's not, I think people are often looking for the answer to everything that ails them and ails society. And maybe there's some people out there that think that bushcraft is the answer. And I'm saying, hey, maybe it's not. Maybe it's not appropriate for everybody.
No.
Not to be exclusionary, but, there's so many people, there's only so much land. So what do you,
That's a good point, though, when you said there would be no trees left. And but back at the turn of the century, like in New Hampshire, there weren't any trees.
Exactly, that's my point.
And along with that, there were no white-tailed deer.
Yep.
There was no habitat.
Correct.
There was no carrying capacity. So, we need to take care of the trees in the forest just like we do anything else. It's part of the system. And
I think again, it comes down to it's something being like appropriate for the location and a wise use of the resources for that location, and wise use of resources not only for that specific geographic location, but wise use of resources in a bigger, worldwide picture maybe, and thinking about more than the snapshot of time that we're in right now. Like with Chris's shelter, those are gonna grow back. We're not developing the land, we're not altering the landscape, we're harvesting a few things,
right.
And that's gonna grow back. But just one last point I want to make before we wrap this thing up is that we have this idea, and this goes back to sort of the underlying theme of this episode, is that we are often taught by the powers that be, by the media, by whoever, that there's really only one way to think about something, one appropriate or one right. I think right would be a better than appropriate, but there's one right way. That's what you believe, and everything else is wrong. And I want to bring up the ideas put forth. Regular listeners know that usually every 2 years, I take a group up to northern Quebec, and we go out into the bush with my Cree friends, David and Anna Bosom. And just a shameless plug, we're going again next March if you're interested. It's kind of a unique experience. But, their culture sees things differently than we see things. So there's an awesome book that I recommend if you're interested in that sort of a thing, and it's called Sacred Ecology by a guy named Fikret Berkez, and I probably butchered the pronunciation of his name, but basically and it's not sacred from like a spiritual or religious perspective. He refers to traditional ecologic knowledge as sacred. So things that have been handed down over generation and generation. But anyway, what he talks about here, the book is really about the differences between the Western science of ecology, which is, 100 years old, and the Earth is probably not in as great a shape now as it was 100 years ago. So, I'm not doubting the veracity of ecological Western knowledge, but where has it gotten us versus the native or indigenous ecological knowledge, which has, we got a phone call. Nope. Traditional ecological knowledge, which has gone on for, thousands and thousands of generations. And so they see things legitimately differently than we do. And the most important thing I want to talk about is the Cree have an idea about the importance of continued use for sustainability. So for us, when we want to conserve a resource in using Western ecological thought, we take a hands-off approach. So for example, say there's like a park, and inside the park, they'll say we want to conserve the resource and not consume the resource, so it's hands-off. So the Cree have a different idea that for them, in order to conserve the resource in the park, they need to continue to use it. So for example, if we're talking about trapping beaver, right? So if there's a series of lakes in a certain region up in northern Quebec and they want to continue to have beaver in those lakes, they will continue to use them. They're not going to trap them every year, but they won't say, hey, this is going to be like a place where we want the beaver to be, so we're never going to trap the beaver. They'll do the same thing. It's not unlike how a farmer would alternate crops, or maybe you divide your field into 4 quadrants and you actively farm one a year and let the other rest. So they will do that, but they, in order to maintain the sustainability of the resource, they believe that it has to be used, which is just in direct opposition to us. And it just brings me back to my point that, the powers that be want us to believe there's only one way, but there's always another way, another viewpoint to look at things by. Anything to add?
No, I think we should wrap this up.
All right, so episode 39, I guess, is over. Hope you guys out there in podcast land enjoyed it. And if you did enjoy it, please leave us a review wherever you listen to this. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.